My name is Bella, and until last Thanksgiving, I believed struggle was simply my destiny. Student loans towered over me like prison walls, my sneakers were patched with duct tape, and the cafeteria's instant noodles had become my signature meal. I wasn't bitter, I told myself. Sacrifice was part of growing up, that my parents were doing their best, and that I just had to endure. But the night I sat at my billionaire grandfather Daniel's dining table, beneath chandeliers sparkling like frozen fire, everything I thought I knew about my family cracked open. The room was filled with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, cousins laughing, crystal glasses clinking. For one fleeting second, I felt safe. I felt like I belonged. Then Grandpa raised his glass, looked directly at me, and said the words that ripped my world apart. "And Bella, glad to see you're putting the college fund we set up to good use." Struggle had become so ordinary for me that I stopped noticing the bruises it left on my spirit. My mornings always began the same way, stumbling out of my cramped apartment, clutching cheap coffee I could barely afford, pulling on those duct-tape sneakers that squeaked with every step. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus cafe, pouring lattes for kids who didn't know what minimum wage meant. At night, I'd collapse onto my mattress on the floor, textbooks stacked like bricks around me, wondering if exhaustion could actually make someone forget how to dream. Still, I told myself I was lucky. Lucky to have a roof over my head, lucky to be in college at all, lucky that my parents John and Linda were somewhere out there, even if they barely answered my texts. Sometimes a one-word reply would come through, weeks late. Busy. That was the closest thing I got to support. So when Thanksgiving rolled around, I tried to push the bitterness away. I told myself it didn't matter, that I had nothing to bring to the family dinner except my presence. Grandpa Daniel's mansion had always been larger than life, the kind of home you saw in magazines, gates that shimmered under golden lights, a driveway long enough to fit 20 cars, windows that reflected the stars. It was intimidating but also comforting in a strange way, like a reminder that no matter how hard things got, there was still wealth and stability somewhere in my bloodline. The inside of the house glowed with warmth. Crystal chandeliers threw light across a dining table so long it could have seated royalty. The smell of roasted turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and cinnamon rolls drifted through the air. My grandmother, Margaret, moved gracefully between the kitchen and dining room, fussing over platters that already looked perfect. I slipped into my seat, trying to make myself small, unnoticed. To my right was little Mason, my 8-year-old cousin, too busy sculpting mashed potatoes with his fork to care about family politics. To my left sat Aunt Julie, with her always raised eyebrows and sharp questions that made me feel like I was on trial every holiday. Across the table, my parents chatted with Uncle Richard, laughing too loudly, as if trying to prove they belonged in this glittering palace. The whole scene felt almost theatrical, everyone playing their roles. Grandpa Daniel at the head of the table, commanding respect without trying. Grandma smiling sweetly, while pretending not to notice when cousins snuck extra cornbread. My parents acting as though everything was normal, as though they hadn't ignored half my calls that semester. I looked around, soaking in the chandeliers, the fine china, the velvet drapes. For a moment, I wanted to believe this was family. That despite my lonely nights and ramen dinners, I was part of something whole, something unbreakable. But deep down, a knot tightened in my stomach. Because in families like ours, silence was often louder than words. And sometimes, all it took was one sentence to shatter the illusion completely. Halfway through dinner, the room settled into that lull where everyone was too busy eating to speak. Silverware clinked against porcelain, glasses chimed softly, and for a fleeting second, I let myself breathe. Maybe this Thanksgiving would pass like the others, awkward, yes, but survivable. That was when Grandpa Daniel cleared his throat. He was never one for speeches unless the moment truly meant something, and everyone knew it. The room quieted instantly. He rose slowly, lifting his crystal glass in a steady hand. "To family," he began, his deep voice warm, a little shaky with age but full of pride. "To seeing our children and grandchildren grow into people we can be proud of." The family murmured in agreement, raising glasses, nodding toward one another. I felt my lips curve into a small smile. For a second, I believed in it, the unity, the pride, the sense of belonging, and then his eyes landed on me. His smile softened, And he added, "And Bella, glad to see you're putting the college fund we set up to good use." Time stopped. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. My heart kicked once, then stumbled into a frantic rhythm. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard him right. College fund? Across the table, Dad choked on his wine, coughing into his napkin, face flushing a violent shade of red. Mom's complexion drained so quickly she looked ghost-like, her fingers trembling as she pushed peas around her plate. Aunt Julie's eyebrows shot higher, her sharp eyes darting between my parents like a hawk circling prey. And then, like a needle puncturing the balloon of silence, Mason, sweet, oblivious Mason, looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Wait, you didn't know?" The words slammed into me harder than any scream could have. I turned slowly toward my parents. My voice came out thin, shaky, quieter than I intended. "What? Fund?" No one answered. The room was suffocating. My grandmother shifted uncomfortably, lips parting as if she wanted to speak, then snapping shut again. Uncle Richard leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, as if watching a drama unfold that he'd rather not be a part of. My cousins stared at their plates, suddenly fascinated by mashed potatoes and gravy. Finally, Grandpa frowned. Confusion clouded his face. "The college fund we set up when you were born, haven't you been using it for tuition? We've been putting money in it for years, every birthday, every Christmas. Even when things got tight, we made sure there was something." I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. My throat went dry, but somehow, words stumbled out. "No one ever told me. I didn't know it existed." My grandmother gasped softly. Aunt Julie leaned forward. "Wait, so, who's been managing it?" That was the moment everything began to unravel. Dad cleared his throat, eyes fixed firmly on his plate. We didn't think she needed to know." I almost laughed, but it came out cracked and broken. "Didn't need to know?" Mom jumped in quickly, her voice tight, almost defensive. "We used it. For the house, for bills, emergencies. We thought it was best." Grandpa's expression hardened, pride draining from his face, replaced with something cold and sharp. His voice cut through the table like glass breaking. "What do you mean you used it?" The air turned electric, the kind of silence that hums in your bones. My chest tightened as the truth clawed its way to the surface. And in that moment, I knew nothing about my life would ever be the same again. My chair scraped loudly against the polished floor as I pushed back, heart hammering in my chest. "You didn't think I needed to know?" My voice cracked on the word needed, rising sharper than I expected. Dad still wouldn't look at me. His eyes stayed glued to the silverware lined neatly on the table, as if he could disappear into the reflection. We thought it wasn't necessary. You were fine. You've always managed." I laughed, bitter and jagged. "Fine? Do you know what fine looks like for me? Working 20 hours a week on top of full-time classes, eating instant noodles because I can't afford groceries, duct taping my sneakers because I don't have the money for new ones. That's your definition of fine?" Mom's face flushed, her hands trembling as she set her fork down. "Bella, don't make this worse than at Island. We had no choice. The recession hit us hard. The roof was leaking, the car needed repairs, and your brother needed braces. We used the money for the family." "The family?" My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "What about me? Wasn't I part of the family? Or did my future not count?" "Bella," Mom snapped, her voice rising for the first time. "You were a child. You wouldn't have understood how bad things were back then." "I was a child when you decided to steal my future," I shot back. "But I'm not a child now, and I understand perfectly. You lied. For years." The silence that followed was unbearable. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, cousins shifting uncomfortably, Aunt Julie leaning in with predatory curiosity, Uncle Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. Even little Mason had stopped playing with his food, his fork hovering midair as though afraid to move. Grandpa Daniel's voice cut through the air, low but commanding. "That money was never meant for you two," he said, glaring at my parents. "It was Bella's. We made that very clear when we created the fund." Dad's jaw tightened. He finally looked up, anger flickering in his eyes. "Maybe if you hadn't insisted on putting it in our names, this wouldn't have happened." The words seemed to hang in the air, poisonous and heavy. My grandfather's face hardened, his knuckles white as he gripped his glass. "We put it in your names because we trusted you," he said coldly. "We believed you'd do right by your daughter. Clearly, we were wrong." Mom looked like she might cry, but I couldn't find any pity left in me. My throat ached, but I forced the words out anyway. "How much was in it?" Grandpa hesitated, his eyes full of regret. "About 40,000 by the time you turned 18. Probably more, we kept adding to it." The number hit me like a punch to the gut. 40,000. Enough to erase every student loan I had. Enough to buy food, books, maybe even give me a chance to breathe for once. Instead, I'd been scraping pennies, breaking myself just to stay afloat. I turned to my parents, my hands trembling with rage. "You let me drown in debt while you sat on my lifeline? You could have told me. You could have said something. Anything." "We did what we had to do," Dad muttered, his voice low, almost inaudible. "No," I said, my voice trembling but fierce. "You did what was convenient. For you, not for me." Mom reached for my hand across the table, tears brimming in her eyes. "We only wanted to protect the family." I jerked my hand back like her touch burned. "Don't call it protection, call it what it is, betrayal." The table was dead silent. Even the chandelier above seemed to buzz with the weight of the moment. My legs shook, but I forced myself to stay standing. For the first time, I wasn't the quiet daughter who accepted scraps. I was the one demanding answers. And I wasn't going to stop until I had them. I sat down, not because I wanted to, but because my legs were shaking too hard to keep me upright. My breath came in shallow bursts, like I'd just run a marathon with no finish line. Across the table, my parents avoided my eyes. Mom picked at her peas like they'd suddenly become fascinating. Dad drained the rest of his wine, his jaw locked tight, as if I was the one embarrassing them. $40,000. The number echoed in my head, a relentless drumbeat. 40,000 that could have wiped away every loan, every sleepless night worrying about rent, every meal of ramen that left me hollow. 40,000 that might have given me back years of my life. And they had spent it, quietly, secretly, while I carried the weight alone. My grandmother finally broke the silence, her voice so soft, I almost missed it. "We need to talk about this, all of us." But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was running wild, dragging me back through years of exhaustion and sacrifice. I remembered the nights working double shifts at the cafe, hands blistered from the steam wand. The mornings I walked to class in shoes patched with duct tape, rain seeping through the cracks. The birthdays where my gift was a card with no money inside, and a reminder to be grateful. All the while, there had been a lifeline, a fund meant for me, rotting away under my parents' excuses. I swallowed hard, forcing the lump in my throat down. "You let me believe we were broke," I whispered. "You let me think I had to do it all on my own. You watched me struggle, and you said nothing." Mom's tears finally spilled over. "Bella, please, don't," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "You don't get to cry, not after this." Grandpa's face was unreadable, but his silence spoke louder than anger. The disappointment radiated from him, heavy, suffocating. For a man who had built empires, betrayal from his own children seemed to wound him more deeply than any business deal gone wrong. Aunt Julie leaned back, eyebrows arched. "Well," she murmured, half to herself, "I suppose the truth always comes out." I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to make them all feel the storm churning inside me. Instead, I reached for my phone. My fingers moved before I could think, pulling up a document I had been keeping quietly for months. Every dollar I'd earned, every scholarship I'd scraped together, every freelance gig that barely paid for groceries. Proof that I hadn't just survived, I had fought for every inch. Dad's eyes flickered toward the glowing screen, and for the first time all night, real fear crossed his face. He knew what it meant. Evidence, paper trails, consequences. The room spun. I couldn't breathe in that house any longer. My chair screeched as I shoved it back and stood, grabbing my coat with trembling hands. "Bella, where are you going?" Grandma's voice followed me, weak, desperate. I didn't answer. My throat was tight, my vision blurred with hot tears. I just kept walking past the chandeliers, past the velvet drapes, past the smiling portraits on the wall that now felt like cruel jokes. Because, in that moment, I realized something even worse than the missing money. It wasn't just about dollars stolen, it was about trust. And trust, once broken, was worth less than nothing. The drive back to campus was silent, except for the hum of my old car's engine. My eyes burned from holding back tears, but my hands gripped the wheel tight, steady. I didn't blast music, didn't call anyone, didn't even cry. I just let the silence fill me until it hardened into something sharper than grief. Determination. By the time I parked outside my tiny apartment, I already knew what I had to do. The next morning, I sat at my desk with a cup of burnt coffee and dialed the number etched into my memory. The bank, Grandpa had mentioned. My voice trembled at first, but I forced it steady. My name is Bella Anderson. I believe I'm the beneficiary of a college trust fund that's been mismanaged. The advisor on the other end sounded confused. If you're the beneficiary, how is it possible you didn't know? I bit down on the bitter laugh rising in my throat. Because my parents never told me. It took hours, transferred calls, verification codes, endless holds, but finally, I got the answer I already feared. The fund had been drained. Not all at once, but slowly, methodically, over 7 years. Every withdrawal signed by my parents, every cent gone. The advisor hesitated, then said carefully, "You may want to consult a lawyer. If the trust was designated for your education, this could fall under misappropriation." Misappropriation. The word rattled in my head, heavy and foreign. My parents, my own parents, potentially criminals in the eyes of the law. That afternoon, I walked across campus to the legal aid office. The representative was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who listened without interruption as I spread out my documents. The original trust paperwork Grandpa had emailed me, the bank's confirmation statements, and my own meticulous records, scholarships, wages, even notes from nights I'd chosen groceries over textbooks. When I finished, she sat back, hands folded. "Bella, based on what you've shown me, your parents may have committed a felony. This isn't just unethical, it's potentially illegal." I felt my chest tighten. Felony. My parents had tucked me into bed as a child, taught me to ride a bike, kissed my scraped knees, and now I was staring down the possibility of seeing them in court. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd been quietly building for years. It wasn't meant for this. It had started as my way of tracking survival. Every scholarship acceptance letter, every job pay stub, every freelance invoice, proof that I had clawed my way forward without a safety net. Now, it was more than a record. It was ammunition. I remembered sitting in my cold apartment one winter night at 2 a.m., calculating whether I could afford shoes or groceries. I'd chosen groceries, taping the shoes again. Meanwhile, my parents had been using my fund for leaky roofs, car repairs, orthodontics, for everything except me. As I flipped through the papers, I saw more than numbers. I saw the life I should have had, the life they stole. I slid the folder into my bag and zipped it shut. My hands were shaking, but not with fear this time, with resolve. They thought they could bury the truth. They thought silence would protect them. But I wasn't that quiet little girl anymore. I had evidence, and I was going to use it. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my apartment door. Sharp, insistent. My stomach sank even before I opened it. Dad stood in the hallway, coat collar turned up, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept. For a moment, I thought he looked older, smaller. Then he opened his mouth, and the old weight returned. "Bella?" he said softly. "Can I come in?" I blocked the doorway with my arm. "Why? So you can lie to my face again?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "No, I need to explain. Please." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. He entered awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets, gaze darting around my cramped apartment like he'd never truly seen how I lived. The peeling paint. The sagging couch. The textbooks stacked high like barricades. "I didn't realize," he muttered, trailing off. I folded my arms. "Didn't realize what? That your daughter was living on canned soup while you drained her college fund?" His shoulders slumped. "We never meant for it to go this far. Your mom and I thought we'd pay it back. At first, it was just small amounts, repairs, bills. Then, we fell behind. It got away from us. Got away from you? My laugh was sharp, humorless. You chose this. Every withdrawal had your signature. Don't pretend it just happened. He winced, but pushed on. We didn't just use it for ourselves, Bella. We used it for your brother too. His school, his surgery. He's always needed more help than you. You've always managed. You've always been strong. The words hit harder than I expected. So, because I was the easy kid, I deserved less? Because I survived without complaining, you decided I didn't need what was mine? He couldn't answer. He stared at the floor, shame flickering across his face. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I pointed toward the door. You should leave, Bella. No. I can't listen to another excuse. You had 18 years to tell me the truth, and you chose silence every single time. He lingered a moment longer, lips parted as if searching for the right words, then closed them again. His footsteps down the hallway sounded hollow, final. The door had barely shut before my phone buzzed. Grandpa Daniel. A simple text. Meet me tomorrow, just us. The next day, I found him at a quiet diner near campus. He was already seated, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him, his expression heavy. He looked up when I walked in, and for once, there was no smile, no pretense. I'm sorry, he said immediately. You didn't do anything. I replied. No, he corrected, shaking his head. But I trusted people who didn't deserve it. That's on me. I slid into the booth, unsure what to say. I checked the trust myself, he continued. It's gone. Every cent. I've already spoken with the bank, they're cooperating. If you want to pursue charges, you have every right. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. It was different hearing it from him. Final. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, placing it gently between us. I can't undo what they did, but this is yours. I stared at it, afraid to touch it. It's not enough to cover everything, he admitted, but it's a start, and I want you to know I've changed my will. Everything I leave behind will go into a trust only for you. No one else touches it. Not again. For the first time in weeks, my eyes stung not from rage, but something softer. Gratitude. I opened the envelope later that night. Inside was a cashier's check for $20,000. It should have felt like salvation. Instead, all I felt was anger because my grandfather believed I was worth it, and my parents never did. Christmas at my grandfather's mansion was always a spectacle. Tall windows draped with velvet curtains, a tree so enormous it nearly touched the chandelier, lights twinkling like stars. To anyone outside, it looked perfect. To me, it felt like stepping into enemy territory. I carried only one thing with me that night, a folder thick with documents, bank statements, legal letters, my own records, neatly organized and bound. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I hadn't imagined years of sacrifice. When I walked in, the warmth of cinnamon and roasted turkey hit me, but it didn't comfort me this time. It felt suffocating, like sugar dusted over poison. My mother, Linda, was laughing too loudly in the kitchen with Aunt Julie, her voice strained. My father, John, lounged on the couch with a glass of whiskey, pretending calm, but the moment their eyes met mine, the laughter stopped. Grandpa Daniel gave me a small nod from across the room, a silent reminder. You're not alone. Dinner began in stiff politeness. Conversation clung to safe topics: traffic, weather, football scores. No one dared mention the trust. Every time I glanced at my parents, they looked away. My brother scrolled through his phone, oblivious. The clinking of forks against china was the loudest sound in the room, and then, as tradition demanded, Dad stood to give his Christmas toast. He raised his glass, smile fixed, voice full of rehearsed warmth. We're just so proud of how far our kids have come. Even in tough times, we've always stuck together as a family. The words twisted in my chest like a blade. Stuck together? My chair scraped loudly as I stood. The room froze. Always stuck together? I repeated, my voice sharp. Right. Except when it came to being honest. Except when it came to me. Every eye turned to me. My mother's face paled. My father's jaw tightened. I pulled the folder from my bag and set it squarely on the table, with a thud that made silverware rattle. "That," I said evenly, "is the full breakdown of the trust fund you drained. Every withdrawal, every date, every cent. Referenced with my student loan statements. Just in case anyone here still thinks I'm overreacting." Gasps rippled around the table. My grandmother's hand flew to her mouth. Aunt Julie leaned forward, eyes glittering with scandal. Mom's voice cracked. "Bella, please, not tonight." "Not tonight?" My laugh was sharp, humorless. How many nights did I walk home in the rain because I couldn't afford bus fare? How many nights did I go hungry so I could make tuition payments on time? While you sat on my fund money Grandpa and Grandma put aside for me, you let me suffer. And now you want to talk about timing? Dad slammed his glass down. "We did what we had to do. It was for the family." I turned on him, fury boiling over. "For the family? Then why was I the only one treated like a stranger? Why did my brother get braces, new laptops, tutoring, while I duct-taped my sneakers and begged professors for extensions because I was too exhausted from working 2 jobs?" My brother finally looked up, shifting uncomfortably. It wasn't all for me," he muttered. "But some of it was. I didn't know it came from your fund." His words stung, but they didn't surprise me. "Exactly," I said coldly. "You didn't know because no one told you the truth, just like they never told me." Grandma's voice trembled. "We didn't know, Bella. We're so sorry." I nodded once. "I believe you. But this isn't just about money. It's about respect, about trust, and about choices." I turned back to my parents. "You could have told me the truth at any point, even after the fund was gone. But you didn't. You let me believe we were all struggling together when, in reality, you left me to struggle alone," Mom whispered, tears streaking her face. "We thought we were doing what was best." "For who?" I demanded. "For me or for the version of me that never asked questions?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, I took a deep breath, my hands trembling but steady enough to flip open the folder. "I filed a formal complaint with the bank. Legal proceedings are already in motion. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because actions have consequences, and I'm done carrying this burden alone." Dad shot up from his chair, eyes blazing. "You're suing your own parents?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm holding you accountable. You'd tear this family apart over money?" he shouted. My voice dropped to a razor's edge. "No. You did that the moment you decided I didn't matter." I closed the folder and picked up an envelope I'd prepared earlier. I walked to the mantel, placed it there, and turned back to the table. "That envelope has copies of the legal documentation and a letter explaining everything, so no one can claim they didn't know. Consider it my Christmas gift." Mom sobbed. Dad glared at the wall. My cousins looked down, ashamed. No one moved. Except Grandpa. He rose, walked over to me, and wrapped his arms around me. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. "You have more family than you think." I hugged him back, my chest tight, tears stinging my eyes. Then I pulled away, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the snow-covered night. Not a single person followed me. The night I walked out of that mansion, snow crunched beneath my boots like brittle glass. My breath clouded in the frozen air, but inside I burned hot with fury and grief. I didn't look back. Not at the glittering lights of the house, not at the shadows in the windows. Let them sit with their silence. I had carried enough of it for all of us. A week later, an official letter arrived from the bank. The investigation had begun. If fraud or misappropriation could be proven and all signs pointed straight to my parents, they would be forced to repay the full amount or face penalties. I didn't celebrate. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a reckoning that should never have been necessary. What I did do was take the cashier's check Grandpa had given me and walk into the bank with my head high. For the first time in years, I paid down a portion of my student loans. Watching the balance shrink felt surreal, like finally being able to breathe after years underwater. The rest of the money, I put into a new account under my name only. No shared signatures, no loopholes, no one but me. Spring came quickly after that. I graduated with honors, standing on the stage in my borrowed cap and gown, scanning the audience. I spotted Grandpa Daniel in the crowd, clapping with pride. My parents weren't there. I told myself I didn't care, but a part of me still ached. A month later, I started my job at the startup where I'd interned. The salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of making at my age. I moved into a modest but clean apartment, bought furniture that wasn't secondhand, and this time a pair of brand new shoes, no duct tape required. But the real change wasn't in my bank account, it was in me. For so long, I'd believed being the strong one meant staying quiet, enduring, never asking for more. My parents had built their choices on that belief that I could handle less, because I always managed. But strength isn't about silence. It's about refusing to be taken advantage of. Sometimes, I catch myself replaying Grandpa's words from Thanksgiving. Glad to see you're putting the college fund to good use. That single sentence tore my life open. But it also gave me clarity. It wasn't the loss of money that hurt most. It was the loss of belief, the betrayal by the people who were supposed to protect me. That scar will never fully fade. But scars don't make you weaker. They remind you of what you survived. And I survived. Now, when I look at myself in the mirror, I don't just see the broke, exhausted girl who once taped her sneakers to keep them together. I see a woman who stood up to lies, who demanded the truth, who reclaimed her future, not because of a trust fund, not because anyone finally decided I was worth it, but because I finally decided it for myself.